There they are. How you doing,
Oh,
Sven? How you doing, Kristin?
Hi.
how are you?
All right. Well, it's incredible to see you. Two of my favorite people. Oh, Kristin just disappeared into the background.
Oh, there
There
I
we
am.
go.
How'd that happen?
We lost you for a second.
I'm like,
Oh, you just flashed. She must have magic powers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, it's so good to have the two of you joining us today. This has been a wild weekend so far. 25 plus events yesterday, 13 hours of broadcasting, a great lineup of events today. And we're going to do it all one more day tomorrow. So it's so great to have you joining us. And I have a question before we start. If you went outside, we're collecting backyard bio pictures from around the world, what kind of biodiversity would you see? I think you're in North Carolina right now. What would you see?
South Carolina.
Oh, South Carolina.
Go ahead, you tell them that.
South Carolina. Well, literally, as we look out the window, we could potentially see dolphins. We see all sorts of different coastal birds that come to nest on the island right across the way. We're right on the intercoastal here. We have marsh hens.
Yeah, you don't want marsh hens, by the way.
Terns, lovebirds, the ones that sing at night, doves. What else? Crabs, lots of crabs, tons of fish, grouper, wreckfish.
All right, very cool. So I thought I'd give a little shout out right now. I'm just looking at the site. We've got people joining from Portugal, Botswana, the United Kingdom, Canada, Costa Rica, the US, Brazil, South Africa. We have quite a global group hanging out with us right now. The Cayman Islands just jumped in. So it's so great to be able to reach everybody with this message about biodiversity on this really important weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So we're so thrilled to have Sven Lindblad joining us. Lived in East Africa, photographing elephants and wildlife in Kenya, assisting filmmakers on a documentary about the destruction of African rainforests, which really helped ground his perspective on nature. He founded Lindblad Expeditions, a unique travel company aimed at offering marine-focused expeditions aboard small ships for adventurous travelers. We also have Kristin Hettermann joining us. She's recognized for her underwater and adventure travel photography, creating awareness for the important environmental social causes. Her work and travels have taken her on adventures around the world with an eye towards ocean conservation and cultures. And her work has been in publications like Scientific American, Newsweek, and Virgin. So great to have the two of you joining us today. You have a really great perspective to share with us, something that definitely a lot of people are thinking about with COVID-19 and the way it's kind of changed our planet.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you want to delve in first, Joe? I mean, do you want us to discuss tourism as an industry as it relates to the environment, or how do you want to proceed? Because this is a really interesting time from the perspective of, obviously, we've never experienced anything like this on a global basis. We spent a lot of time up until February this year, more or less, talking about over-tourism. The fact that there were, the negative side of tourism was really very much in the news rather often. Too many people here, too many people there, too much noise, too much this, too much crowding in national parks, et cetera, all of which was very legitimate, or much of it was legitimate, at least as a talking point. And now all of a sudden we have a complete stop of all tourism on a global basis. And now we're talking about something very, very different. 100 million people, plus or minus, having lost their jobs in relationship to this industry. Vast areas completely empty of any kind of income. For example, there are places in parts of Africa where poachers are coming back in because there is no presence of tourism. Rangers aren't getting paid. And so it's basically open season for them. They can come back in and take more or less whatever they want. And so now we're realizing that now we're seeing something that's totally different that we hoped we'd never see, which is the total downfall of tourism. I've been speaking with people in Alaska, for example. So these folks in Southeast Alaska were looking to their best year ever as far as tourism goes. I think something like 1.4 million visitors. In my mind, too many, but nevertheless. But going from a plan of 1.4 to essentially 0, or maybe a few thousand that might ultimately wind up going. And these people have built their entire economic systems on this as a primary source of income. And so they're devastated. A lot of them, a lot of those businesses will disappear. Many of them won't ever come back. And so now tourism has to face a whole lot of other questions that it really never had to face before. So, you know, one of the interesting things would be that as it comes back, and obviously it will come back, what have we learned as a consequence of this? Have we thought about things perhaps a little bit differently? Might we, on a global basis, you know, recognize that we perhaps overdid it in many ways, and that we maybe should be more mindful or more thoughtful of how this industry develops? I don't know. I think in the beginning, there'll be such a rush to anything that provides income, livelihood, and probably any kind of real thought as to what I just said a moment ago is probably unlikely, but maybe over time. But tourism clearly is a double-edged sword, and now we've seen the other side of the sword for the first time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we see the news focuses a lot right now on, you know, certain spots where animals are coming back into areas you might not see as often, like, you know, jellies in the canals of Venice, but they're kind of ignoring that other side, that a lot of nature is protected through tourism. You know, a plot of rainforest is worth much more if preserved and protected sustainably for people to visit and experience than, you know, just clear cut and gone. And so with that loss of those tourism dollars, it does open up these areas, like you said, the poaching. There's more pressures on people to provide for their families. It is going to have a really negative effect on conservation around the world.
Yeah, and hopefully on a short-lived basis. You know, for example, the national parks in all over the world. Let's take the Serengeti National Park, right, in Tanzania. You know, that park is not going to disappear, but if this would persist over a prolonged period of time, so many of the systems that protect the park would be so decimated that it would just be, you know, every month that goes by, it just gets harder to bring those back into a functional manner. And if tourists stop going to places like that, they would become, in essence, cornfields or ranch land or such, because the reality is, and it's unfortunate in many ways, but the reality is that wildlife and wild places, in order to be protected because of our huge populations and our greed and our various other things and our necessities, have to compete. Wildlife has to pay its way, and if it doesn't, it's going to be something else. And that's just the way the world works.
Yeah. So Kristin, you know, travel, you see places, you spend a lot of time beneath the surface of the ocean, which is an amazing place to be. Writing about that. What have you turned your attention to these days? Are you writing about the situation and what's happening?
I am sitting back right now and waiting for my clear inspiration on what exactly to write about. Clearly, initially, everything has been focused on COVID. And so as I'm not an expert in things related to the disease or how it's affecting people internationally, I really haven't been focusing on that right now. But as we move through this, I think there are going to be some important avenues that open for people's voices to be heard. Obviously, in the beginning, when a very traumatic situation like this happens, you also don't want to seem like you're being insensitive to the things that are really, really hurting people, the deaths, the virus, how it's affecting people's health, the numbers that are, you know, going up around the world. But as we move through this, and as we were talking about when we were discussing topics for this, I think it's important to realize how people are also being affected by these ancillary things that the COVID crisis is affecting. And tourism is one that is so close to Sven and I. There's not a day that goes by that we're not face to face with something that's being very heavily affected by this. And of course, being people that love to travel and love tourism, but also love the environment, it's always one of those balanced things of saying, okay, how much tourism is good and how much is not good. And I've lived mostly in Hawaii for the past 10 years, and Hawaii is a great example of where mass tourism has come in and really started to become a detriment to the environment there. And there's a lot of local, just local concern about how mass tourism has affected Hawaii. And so now, during a time where tourists aren't in the Hawaiian Islands at all, people are rejoicing over their ability to enjoy the environment, but at the same time, people have lost their jobs. I think about 70% of the economy or more is dependent on tourism in Hawaii right now. So as we move through those, how do we create new models, perhaps, where there is a part that's dependent on tourism, of course, because tourism can be a very positive thing, but not overly dependent on tourism. So I thought showing this movie in terms of, I think it's very clear some of the negatives that tourism do bring. It's easy to see that when you go into an area and there's lots of people on the beach and there's trash and, trash floating in the water and things like that. But there's a lot of really positive ways, and Sven's company, being in sustainable tourism, has been focused on it. And they have this wonderful video that's quite inspiring. And it also shows how tourism, it was really great for me to watch, because it really highlights the different areas where tourism can be really positive within a community. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Perfect.
And then I'm going to optimize and share sound. And then do I press and then I say share? Okay.
There we go. Coming up now.
Okay. Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, so here.
When you're talking about Lindblad Expeditions with your clients, you're talking about 50 years of sustainability. As of January 1st, 2019, Lindblad Expeditions became a 100% carbon neutral company. But what led up to that? At an early age, our founder and CEO, Sven Lindblad, developed a sense of wonder and awe for the natural world. His father, Lars-Eric Lindblad, who many know as the father of ecotourism, showed Sven what it meant to care so much about something that you had to act. Back in 1966, Lars-Eric Lindblad visited Galapagos. He saw what a special place it was and paid the salaries of the first 2 park rangers. He wanted to work with them to protect Galapagos for future generations. Lars-Eric helped establish the guidelines still in use today by the national park about how to explore the Galapagos archipelago responsibly. The commitment that guides us today stems from these formative years, and our focus today has expanded. At Lindblad Expeditions, we care about green operations.
We can be an influence on the travel industry more broadly as a consequence of not what we say, but as a consequence of what we do.
We care about protecting nature and preserving cultures. And that's why we give our guests the opportunity to support projects in all the places we visit, and the ocean more globally. Since 1997, our travelers have donated more than $18.5 million to support conservation, education, research, storytelling, and technology priorities in the places they visit worldwide. We care about supporting local communities, and that's why we take 5% of the sales made in our shipboard global galleries and redirect them to an artisan fund that provides opportunities for local people. That's why we hire local panga drivers, build community interactions into all of our itineraries, and visit local schools and farms. In 2019, we became a carbon neutral company. This means that we measure all sources of carbon emissions resulting from our business. We then reduce or eliminate any unnecessary emissions. Those that remain are offset through a carefully selected portfolio of investments, including renewable energy, reforestation, and community projects. This offsetting covers our entire fleet, both US-based offices, the Lindblad sales team you work with day to day, and any carbon-emitting experiences your clients may have while traveling aboard the fleet. We also developed an online carbon calculator so that guests who wish to take climate action can easily offset the emissions resulting from their flights.
We are offsetting our emissions because we recognize the fact that climate change is a massive threat to our future.
Yes.
We have a robust sustainable seafood program that continuously changes and evolves based on ocean health. We source sustainable seafood and are vigilant about researching the best species to serve.
The core of our program is to serve local, sustainable, and regional food. We truly believe in making an impact on the world, whether it's with the oceans or an economic impact to our vendors. It's a big part of what we do.
We work in partnership with experts and advisors from the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they are happy to provide us with seafood guides to send home with our travelers so they can take what they learn about sustainable seafood on board and put it into their own homes and their own lives.
I absolutely think companies like Lindblad can lead the charge on seafood sustainability.
The ships are free of single-use plastic, and we're currently working with our local suppliers and partners to remove single-use plastics from land operations associated with the voyages as well. We're aware of microplastics entering the ocean and the problems that can cause, so we're actively researching the best filtration systems to address this problem. Just recently, we became the first cruise line to adopt the Premium Purity Cleaning System, a revolutionary way to essentially allow the ships to disinfect themselves. This will save millions of gallons of water year over year, not to mention the cleaner air for guests, crew, and staff on the ship.
Lindblad Expeditions, we're the oldest and most experienced expedition travel company in the world, and we go to some of the wildest, most remote places on the planet. We're very conscious of where we travel, the amount of waste that we produce. The cleanliness of our ship is so important to keep a healthy environment. Premium purity is unlike anything we've ever seen out there. In the end, if we have a system that's substantially healthier for the environment, we all win.
So when you're talking with clients about Lindblad Expeditions, tell them this. Sustainability has been part of Lindblad Expeditions since day one. It's not a new fad. It's a lens we've always looked through when developing itineraries to wild and remote places. We've been leading sustainable travel efforts for more than 50 years. 50 years ago, we didn't know what carbon neutrality was. Now we do. And 50 years from now, there will be other issues that come to light, and we will continually be looking for ways to combat whatever is to come.
All right, you're back.
You're back.
Thank you so much for sharing that video. There's a lot I want to unpack there before we take a few questions that have come in. But first, I want to give a shout out to Spain, Norway, and Mexico who have joined in since the event started, as well as North Macedonia for the first time today. So very cool to have just a wild global. I think it's been close to 80 countries or more have been tuning into the Global Biodiversity Festival. So it's been a ton of fun. So a few things to unpack from that video. The first one, Sven, that picture from back in the day with those white shorts. I'm looking at you in a whole different perspective now. Very cool. But I mean, truthfully, in all honesty, you know, the what Lindblad Expeditions does with, you know, working with partners locally in places like the Galapagos, you know, French Polynesia and such is absolutely incredible. The sustainable model that you have built, and it really should be something being emulated by all travel companies. I think it's amazing work that you're doing.
Well, thanks. But, you know, it's interesting when you think about the number of people that travel on a global basis. I mean, I'll give you an example. You know what? A long time ago, I started a foundation called the Travelers Conservation Foundation, and this was I don't know 20 years ago, maybe more, and it was for an organization called the United States Tour Operators Association, which at the time took 9 million. All its 57 members took 9 million travelers a year. And I said, can you imagine if we just for each traveler, we allocate to begin with $1, we would have a $9 million fund instantly to support conservation and cultural preservation. And so, you know, and just, I always think it's interesting to reduce it down to what can something relatively small do when done in a large context. So $1 times 9 million is meaningful. And it is so easy for this industry globally to become way more involved in the solutions that are necessary. And what we're going to find coming out of COVID is that municipalities, local governments, states, countries are going to have less money to devote to these kinds of activities because they will have lost so much money as a consequence of this that they will likely have other priorities. So for example, the restoration projects of a town that were on the books will no longer be on the books. There'll be all kinds of projects which will be abandoned for quite some time as recovery takes hold. So it is an opportunity for the tourism industry to take a greater role and have more responsibility to support these kinds of activities by engaging their travelers. And the travelers, interestingly enough, are delighted at the prospect of being able to be helpful to these things. It just needs creativity to do it.
All right. So we've got some great questions coming in via the Slido room right now. And Katie wants to know, how do you choose a conservation organization to partner with? You know, say somewhere like the Galapagos or somewhere else.
Yeah. So in each area, it's somewhat different because, you know, we have a huge network of people, naturalists, historians, scientists, conservationists, what have you. And so when we're in a new area, we kind of put out an APB. We sort of say, hey, anybody in our network have any specific ideas that they'd like us to take a close look at? And then we've got a community of people that vet those ideas together with National Geographic, because we have, our fund is the Lindblad National Geographic Fund for Conservation, Education, and Exploration. And so these ideas come in myriad ways. And there's an application process, and there's a call for proposals process, which is done every year.
All right. So I've got a question that I think will work well for the two of you to kind of share your thoughts on. If there was one thing that each of you could change about ecotourism to improve its impact on a global scale, what would it be?
Do you want to start?
I think that, and I've thought this for a while, I think the model that they use in the Galapagos, where there's a limited number of people and there are fees paid for the national parks when people come in, when they enter the country, I think that type of model is really good, where there's control over the number of people. It can't just be exponential growth. You know, this is something that I feel like would benefit Hawaii a lot as well. And then also when people come in, they pay a fee, and that fee goes directly to preservation and conservation in that specific place. That would probably be my dream wish list.
It's a tough one. When you think about it on a global basis, there are painfully few places where tourism has been developed in a strategic way. The only country that I know of that has done it is Bhutan, where they went from zero tourism to planned, organized, strategic tourism that integrated the values of the country and the culture with certain goals as it relates to bringing in tourists. I mean, everywhere else in the world, it's basically totally out of hand. So like Kristin says, mentioned Hawaii, and there are all kinds of countries like it, plenty along the Mediterranean, I mean, just all over the world where tourism is just totally out of hand. And to put that genie back in the box is very, very, very complex. But one thing I think that would be, which I think that I would be most excited about, is if there was a much broader engagement between countries, companies, and travelers to recognize that certain things need significant support, and to find creative strategies to create that sort of mutual bond, if you will. So that would be my, at the top of my wish list.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think now, you know, having been at a spot where things were too high and obviously people are researching and studying, and then now a spot where tourism has stopped, do you think now is an opportunity where we can kind of get a baseline for both of those, and that's going to help us find the right level of tourism in some areas?
Well, yeah. First of all, it's a little complex from the perspective of who leads a question like that. And right now, the world is going to be like struggling to sort of recapture tourism, if you will, and try and bring it back. And anything that is even remotely in the any conversation around any kind of restriction or limitation or this, it probably won't go over so well at the moment. It's probably a very, very difficult time to have that conversation from a practical perspective. But I do think the industry constantly has to be reevaluated looked at differently. And it's, I don't know if this is the right time. I think it's a tough time because right now people have been hurt so badly that first they're going to have to recover.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about education very briefly because I think education is a key to protecting our planet. I think kids are more switched on than ever before. If we could put them in more positions of power, I think we'd see some changes and some more protections happening. So I noticed in the video you visited that school in the Galapagos. I saw myself make a brief couple-second appearance in that video as a Grosvenor Teacher Fellow. It's an incredible program. Started off as 2 teachers a year being taken out on Lindblad ships to experience an expedition and then bring that back to their communities. It's grown to 40 to 50 a year. Can you tell me a little bit about why that education component is so important to you?
Well, because if you think about it, teachers are the key to building the minds of young people who will inherit the future. So it just seems to me that is probably the smartest place to invest in change is via teachers, because they exponentially touch so many people. Yeah. And so to me, it's just a very logical concept, right? You try and take an ounce of time, an ounce of money, and then you try and figure out how do you leverage that in the most meaningful way. And I would argue for the fact that teachers is a really, really good way to leverage
absolutely.
energy and resources.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up today, I want to take things on a little bit of a different note. And having traveled the world, can each of you share a biodiversity moment, something that has stuck with you, somewhere you've been where you were just in awe of what you were seeing? Is this real? Maybe.
Oh my goodness. Why don't you start, babe? Because I mean, we both have tons. Wait, I just have to tell this guy maybe 5 minutes later.
The one that comes immediately to my mind is going for the first time to Cabo Pulmo National Marine Park, which is in Baja California in Mexico. And what I love about this marine park is it was a local fishermen's community that had been basically decimated, had been overfished. And I think it's 25 years ago, I think they're about to celebrate their 25th anniversary. The local fishermen came together and decided as a unit, a group of families, that they were going to protect a specific area. And so when we first dove there, it was about 5 years ago, and there was this massive school of jacks that just seemed to go on like walls of fish, right? That I'd never seen anything like this. And so talking about like biodiversity, biomass, sharks, turtles, all sorts of wildlife had come back because they had simply stopped fishing. And of course, the area around, then they knew that the area around this marine park would also benefit. So commercial, small scale commercial activities for the local fishermen continued, but outside of the marine park. But because they had protected this one area, it showed how quickly the ocean does come back, which I know Enrique Sala is, I think, coming up today, right?
A little bit later today, him and Paul Rose are going to join.
Yeah, and he will speak a lot about that with his Pristine Seas effort.
Yeah. What about you, Sven? What's a moment that stood out for you?
Well, there's so many, but one I just constantly remember is this was way back in 1977, I guess, 76 maybe, where I got to spend a week with a woman called Diane Fossey in Rwanda, who was the first person to really study mountain gorillas. And she was a bit of a legend at that time. And it really just dawned on me that the possibility of a single individual to have such an extraordinary impact on our ability to understand an animal and its habitat better, and for us to be able to connect with the importance of of that animal being allowed to exist and that habitat being protected.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Well, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us today. You know, the legacy that Lindblad Expeditions has built. It's industry leading, and it really should be a role model for many organizations, especially as things do inevitably start to tick back up with tourism. And thank you for sharing that important perspective that tourism is important. It plays a big role in protecting habitats, protecting biodiversity.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Give Enrique my best, will you?
I absolutely will. Thanks so much, Sven.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.